And when my father found her, my mother told me when she was still alive that she looked up at my father thinking he was an angel. And she said to him, David, are we in heaven? This is exactly what my mother told me. She said, David, because she thought my father came back to take her to heaven. She didn't even think she was even alive at that point.
Because of the condition, right?
Yeah, she was hallucinating because she had a high fever and she was only hours away from death. And my father found her on a cot in the middle of this room with my aunt next to her. But it's an incredible chapter how they finally met again. And she almost died. I mean, Bohdan. Is it Bohdan?
Bohdan. Yeah, like that. It's I feel like there's certain Polish bits to that pronunciation, but yeah, it's entirely Ukrainian name for sure.
Yeah, it's not going to be an easy name for people in this country to say.
Really, yeah, I've noticed that indeed for sure. But I'm okay if somebody slightly mispronounces it, or not even slightly for that matter. I'm perfectly fine with that.
Well, I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, likewise. Listen, it's a big honor for me. We are here to talk about matters as important as they are tragic indeed, right?
Yes. And there's a lot of parallels between what goes on in the Ukraine now versus what happened back then. And are you in Kiev?
I'm near. Yeah, I'm pretty near to the capital. I'm 60 kilometers away. Yeah, I'm pretty close to the capital city. I'm grateful to you for the fact that you've expressed your support. Indeed, I visited your site, and there's this some kind of support badge on your site that says that the site stands with Ukraine, and that means a lot. You know, I always get touched, and I always get almost teary and emotional when foreigners express their support, because, you know, for Ukrainians, we sort of don't have options, right? It is a sort of self-evident thing that we've got to unite and stand together. But when people from afar, when people from abroad realize and comprehend and truly understand the situation, that's really a lot. You know,
well, my heart goes out to your people. And just so you know, my ancestors came from the Ukraine, Bohdan.
Really?
You need to understand, if you go back into my family tree, many of my ancestors, although my parents from Lithuania, when you go back far enough, many of my relatives were from the Ukraine. So I have a warmth in my heart for your people because my family comes from your country.
Do you know what region they come from?
No, I don't
remember. Yeah.
No, because my grandfather was a rabbi in Lithuania, but I think his parents were from Russia, and I think they came from that Ukraine area. I don't know exactly where that was.
Okay, yeah, right. Well, as far as I can judge, it feels like, first of all, are you a frequent guest on podcasts? Have you recorded anything previously?
Oh yeah, I have a media page. I'm doing maybe two podcasts a week.
Really interesting.
And I'm using your format here with this Zen whatever it's called.
Zencastr. Yeah, that's a lovely platform. It's really useful.
Oh, it's great. I love it.
You've used it previously?
Yeah, just 2 days ago, I was talking to the people in Australia.
Really? Yeah, nice.
Yeah,
that's
so
good.
now I'm with you, and then next week I'll probably be on the BBC in London. So.
Really?
Yeah, I'm going all over the world with this book because I have an ebook. I can send this out to anybody through the internet.
Yeah, nice. How long was the book out now?
About a year and a half.
Really? Yeah. Interesting. How has it done so far in terms of numbers and sales? What would you say?
I would say in the first year I made close to $40,000, which isn't bad for the first year.
Is that 40,000? Is that considered success or semi-success?
No. For the first year, usually the first year is one of the hardest years, and I'm not going through Amazon or Barnes and Noble. They buy the book off of my website, Bohdan. So I got to tell you the website address. They can order the book on my website.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, so for that fact, that's done pretty well, I can reckon, right?
Yeah, I mean. Who doesn't want to hear about a love story that took place during the Holocaust?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Definitely most. Yeah, I've always been a fan of touching stories, especially those that did take place, because it's not just fiction. It's definitely not just fiction. So yeah, let's ease into it. I was going to ask you, first of all, what drove you into writing a book? Would I be right by assuming that by doing so, you've kind of fulfilled some sort of dues before your parents? Is that reasonable for me to assume?
Yes. First of all, let me tell you, I'm the last surviving member of my immediate family. If I didn't write their book, their story would never have been told.
Wow.
And I believe I'm on a mission to keep their legacy alive around the world because people didn't really know who they were. So I felt it was my responsibility as their son to bring their story to light, and that's what I've been doing. So, and it's been very well received all over. Well, the European has only started about a week or so ago. Before that, it was only here in the States. But now I'm going to be going all over the world, the Middle East, to Europe.
Wow. Really?
So I'm going to be all over. And now with the ebook, it's going to be easy to send it out to everybody. I'm very excited.
Yeah, you should be, for sure. That's quite an achievement indeed. And now you're about to do a kind of a book tour, right? Promoting your book, speaking. Is it going to be some public speaking? Yeah.
Public speaking. Yeah. Wow. I'm going to the schools, the libraries. My target audience are the college children, the college kids, and the children because they know very little about the Holocaust. And since the war in Ukraine started, there's so many people interested in my book because if you look at some of the photos, they see similarities between the Russians and the Nazis.
A lot.
Yeah. And they go to my book because they think it relates to what's going on in the Ukraine.
Was that a shock to you to discover that there was a war started in Ukraine? Could you take me back a little bit to how you first heard about this action in Ukraine here?
Well, we knew about Putin and we knew about his strategy of trying to take over the area of the Ukraine. And for many of us, we didn't think he'd ever do it. And so then when he did go in, it was a shock to a lot of people. And the media has been covering it quite extensively. Every night on the news, Bohan, there's always something going on the news about what's going on in Ukraine. Zelensky and your Russian person that's running the show over there. So,
right. Have you noticed any? That's what I usually ask. I think people who listen to my podcast, they might kind of be fed up with a question like that. But when I'm talking to natives from abroad about the situation in Ukraine, I like asking if you and anybody else is faced with some pushback. Because there seem to be the two narratives, I feel like, in the United States, pro and against support of Ukraine. Have you been noticing lots of pushback, lots of, anything of that kind?
There are people, especially in the government, that are questioning the money that's being sent to the Ukraine. A lot of that is political. A lot of that is, the Democrats versus the Republicans. There is a I would say not a majority, but there is a group that believes that the country wants to get more of an accounting of what the money is being spent for in the Ukraine.
Yeah, right. Which is understandable because it appears to me that, if we are talking about democracy, there must be a counter force, right? A counter, the opposition, right? So that's a sign of democracy. There always is.
Yeah, just like with the book, it's like the light and the darkness. My parents' strength of the human spirit, their love and their faith, versus the darkness, the destruction and the evil of Adolf Hitler and the Third Reich. So there's always a dark side and a light side, and always the light extinguishes the darkness.
Yeah. Let's get into the book. I don't mean to turn it into something about my case and my situation, my country. So how do you recall in details the moment when you understand that you've got to write that book? How did that happen, that exact moment when you understood it's about time?
Okay, so what happened, Bohan, in September of 1993, my father passed away from heart disease in Florida. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the country of U.S., the cities. It was back then, it was about 3 hours by plane to get to Florida. And so my brother and I went down there for the funeral. And then a couple of weeks later, we both decided that we were going to end up putting the condominium that my parents were living in, we were going to sell the place to the market. So I was in his condo cleaning up the various areas in his place for the real estate people to come in. And when I went into his bedroom, I found documents in his night table. And in those documents were notes from the doctors and the lawyers that were petitioning the German government for reparations that my parents received for the loss of their daughter and the loss of their families. And that night, when I first started reading all the documents that were both in German and in English, I realized there was so much they did not tell me about. So it came as quite a shock when I was reading through these and they were talking about what happened to my mother, what happened to my father, what happened to my sister, that I felt it was coming upon me that I was going to write this book. And what made it even more urgent was that my brother passed away about 5 years later. I didn't start writing this book right away, but when he passed, I was the last surviving member of my immediate family. I knew right then and there, back in mid-2000s, I had to write this book, otherwise no one would ever know what happened.
Yeah, so that wasn't almost, I feel like it's not even a choice. It wasn't even optional, right? That's your direct duty, almost like responsibility.
I felt that responsibility as their son. I had to write this book for them because there was so much I did not know. And when they were alive, I didn't really appreciate what they had gone through during the war. I was a young child. Growing up to me was about being an American and playing all these sports.
Yeah,
I didn't realize how special they were.
It's always a mind-blowing and awakening experience when all of a sudden something like that happens to you directly. That's partially our Ukrainian case, when people hadn't even ever been exposed to any military actions prior to that. And now we are slowly but surely becoming, not least due to the international support, very militarized and prepared in all sense of that word. But had there been any conversation between you and your parents prior to your father's passing about the Holocaust and World War II? Had you talked at least a little bit about something like that?
Well, they rarely brought it up. When they did bring it up, it was after we were watching TV, the documentary. It was a documentary called The World at War, where they were showing pictures of the Germans taking the Jews into the concentration camps. My parents would bring it up while we were watching TV once in a while. My father would make reference that he was in Dachau and he was taking we didn't go into that detail, but he told us about that. And then my mother mentioned one time about having a daughter. And I didn't really press her on it because it was too sensitive of a topic for me to start asking a lot of questions.
How old were you at the moment of that conversation?
At that time, I was about 14, 15 years old. I was pretty young. Wow. I didn't really press the issue, but I knew that I had a daughter. And later, I knew her name was Rose, and I found out a lot of information.
Right?
Yeah, Rose Miriam. Yeah, I found out a lot through the Holocaust Museum and the documents I found, which now is in the library in the Holocaust Museum. The documents I found is in the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. So that was some information. A cousin in Tel Aviv, Israel, she also gave me some information. My cousin's mother was my mother's sister, and they were together during the war. So there was a lot of information I got from her, too.
And at that moment when you were having that conversation, due to your age and perhaps lack of exposure experience, it didn't quite register too deeply, right? But it's only after your parents passed that you truly understand what they had been through.
That is correct. That's right. It was only after they passed away that I realized how special they were. And it was my responsibility to make people understand what I finally got to know, that these people were very special.
Is there a sense of remorse/regret for not getting a little bit deeper into those topics and getting a bit more personal and emotional, perhaps, back when they were alive? Yeah, we're talking about highly private and emotional, sensitive topics, but that's what I feel. My mother is alive and well, but I feel like every day that I spend with her, I still feel like it's not enough, and there must be something more than I can do, because sooner or later that won't be too late. So now, after they were gone, did you feel a bit of regretful in that way for not initiating perhaps anything more serious?
It was not only regretful, it was also guilt.
Yeah.
Guilt of not appreciating who they were.
Right.
But I will tell you, and I know I'm going to get a little bit spiritual here, when I was writing the book, I am telling you as I'm looking at you that when I was on my computer, I could feel my fingers running across the keyboard as if there was a spirit in my head that was telling me what to say. And in the mornings, I would wake up and I looked at what I was writing, and I couldn't believe those were my words. I believe my parents were around me at the time I was writing this book. A lot of things that happened spiritually that happened around me through that time. It was absolutely amazing. And I know now I believe they're with me even to this day. When I speak in front of audience, I'm speaking to you, I know they're right here with me. So
I've thought about it exactly today. I've thought about the spiritual element. And, you know, I've happened to listen a lot of debates of scientists versus priests and religious, non-religious, believers, non-believers. And I just find it so unbelievably difficult to discard, although subjective, but still evidence. Although it's subjective, although it's called anecdotal, you know how people call it anecdotal evidence. And I feel it serves a bad ring. There's a bad ring to that adjective, anecdotal evidence, because just because it's subjective cannot be proven, testified anyhow, that doesn't make it anecdotal. And I feel really bad that people, mostly a lot of people who've had subjective but enlightening and spiritual deep experiences, they aren't able to prove it anyhow. I just feel bad, but we don't even probably need it, because what we need is what we feel, and it just remains with us.
It comes from the inside. It's all about connecting, and I could feel it. It's a feeling you get. A lot of people don't have the ability to do that. More evolved, like, you know, I think the message of religion is all a spiritual one, in the sense that we're all connected together and we're all God's children. And so when they get into like dividing the different religions, sometimes that separates us from being together. And so that to me is very important, that although I am a Jew, I believe the message Judaism brings, a lot of other faiths also feel the same too.
Are you surrounded by a lot of non-believers, perhaps? Are you exposed to a lot of people who are not on the same spiritual page with you as you are?
No, most of the people I have around me are believers, are spiritual people. I will tell you that I'm getting people who are Holocaust deniers, people who believe that the Holocaust never happened. And those are the people that need to be taught exactly, and showing what happened to my family and the information that we got. And they're very they like to separate people, and they look at a way of dividing people rather than bringing them together, because they have an agenda of wanting to take over politically, socially, economically, and they figure if they could bring people apart and have them fight against each other, they can win. That's how Hitler got into power. It's by separating the people and then taking over.
I've definitely heard the term Holocaust denier. I've never looked into it deeply enough. What is their reasoning? What kind of even logic is there behind their statements? Do you know?
Well, they believe that the Jews' bottom line is that they were going to be taking over the world, and they believe that there was an agenda for the Jewish people who were going to do this. And those in not power, but those who had high positions, they believed that they were not people that were really trustworthy, and they were different from the rest of people. And so they believe that they made up the stories just to get the sympathy of the world. But in the reality, they believe that the evidence that was shown, they couldn't believe that happened.
Even if we wildly suppose so, still does that even justify the atrocities, endless, numerous killings, murderers that took place? I mean, right? How can they deny those numbers? How can they deny statistics? How can they deny the fact that nearly every European family has a history, right, of somebody being killed? Yeah.
They believed a lot of that was staged.
Really? Well, that's crazy now. That's borderline conspiracy, right?
Right. Not to say they didn't believe that some people died, but they say the majority of the people, that 6 million Jews, they said it's impossible. Really? Something would have stopped them. And they said this was all contrived by people that wanted to take advantage. So they decided that this was all staged. So because they believed the Jews were going to be the ones who were going to control the world. And of course, Hitler, which is ridiculous, but Hitler also looked at the Jews as stopping him, because his whole goal was to take over his goal was to be the master race and to take over the world.
Which, hearing narratives of this kind to somebody like you who's had relatives take part in that madness, must be especially painful, isn't it? To hear somebody bluntly deny something like that, it's really excruciating for you.
It's horrible. You got to remember, I had a 3.5-year-old sister who I never met that was actually taken by the SS And
Wow.
she and 1,600 other children were killed in March of 1944. And all my family. My mother was one of 9 children. They all perished. My grandfather was a rabbi. My family on both sides were all exterminated. That's one of the reasons I'm the only one, because I'm the only native born. My brother was born in Munich, Germany in 1946. But it was a very difficult time because it's so personal to me. My whole life changed because of the war. My parents were very shut down emotionally. They rarely ever gave any kind of affection or love outwardly because they were not connecting emotionally because it was so painful for them to go back
Yeah,
and
it's
remember
a trauma, right?
trauma.
It's a
Right?
huge trauma. It's probably even generational trauma. They had you when they were how old?
They were in their late 20s, early 30s at the most, somewhere around late 20s,
Yeah,
30s.
which was what year? What year was that?
Well, I was born in 49.
49. Okay, yeah.
So, and they came here in 48. So it was about that time. So yeah, they were like in their 20s or 30s. My father was born in 1915. My mother was born in 1918.
Okay. Yeah, they happened to live exactly through that time. My grandma happened to live through the Nazis' occupation of certain regions of Ukraine. And I was talking to my mother the other day, and I told her that I'm going to have this guest. I told her your story, and she said, make sure that you tell this story. And the story that I'm about to tell, it's truly tragic and painful beyond comprehension. She said that that story was told her by her mom, by my grandma. And she said that she, back when the village was occupied, she saw how the Germans gathered the Jewish people, and they were taking them somewhere. There were a lot of, like, tens of people, and they were taking them down the street to a place where they later dug a hole and they buried them alive. They didn't even shoot them before, they just buried them alive. And she and my grandma recalled seeing a newly married couple, and the bride was still wearing this white, bride dress, and they were walking together, kind of, hugging each other like that. And they just buried those people alive. And the people later said that when Germans were rushed out of that place, that the soil was moving in the place where they buried those people. The soil was moving, and later they dug out teeth and jewelry and hair, human hair. And if you think about something like that, and I don't even have to think about something like that because I'm witnessing it with my own people in 2023. But that story, it's like, if you take it into consideration clearly, just like walking alongside with your newly bride, knowing that there's absolutely nothing you can do.
Yeah. And the pictures coming here into the States, Vaughn, when the Ukrainian people are in the subways and they're hiding from the bombs, the people who are dying in the apartment buildings. I mean, I feel like I'm looking at 1940, 41 Germany in Europe. I mean, the images I'm seeing is almost identical to what I saw, like when the Warsaw, Poland, when there was a Warsaw upbringing, the same kinds of pictures.
Absolutely.
And in my book, I show that. It almost looks like identical. It's an identical situation.
The same narratives, the same reasoning about liberating people who speak the same language. Wasn't this one of the Hitler's excuse to invade Poland? Something I'm not strong with history, but yeah, he claimed that some people speak German, that therefore he had to liberate them. Same symbolism. Right.
Yeah, the Rhineland, and there's certain areas between Poland and Germany. If these are German people, they had an excuse to go in and take that land. Hitler's main thing was to conquer land, so we had more room for the German people. And if you weren't but by the way, Hitler wasn't even an Aryan. There's rumors that his grandmother was Jewish.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. Is that confirmed or not yet?
No, I don't really know. I mean, I'm sure part of that it came up. Whether it can be proved, I don't know. But he was not an Aryan. Yet he believed the Aryan people were the master race, and the people that her soldiers were all like Aryan.
One question that I often ask myself, and I think this question is specifically also relevant in Hitler context, is I think about Putin and I ask myself a question whether he's a truly biologically, physiologically delusional? Is it something in his brain that just stops him, prevents him from seeing the picture fully? Or is it all willful and purposeful and specific? What do you think in case of Hitler? Do you think he precisely and accurately knew what he was doing, for the fact that he may not have been Aryan to full extent? Or do you think he was just natural, biologically delusional? He wasn't capable physiologically to comprehend the outcomes of his atrocities?
I think later on in his reign, he started losing his mind.
Yeah.
Early on, it wasn't that way, I believe, because Germany lost World War One, and Hitler came to power, making the people understand that it was the Jews, the communists, that really lost the war for Germany. And he was rallying the people to become much more nationalistic. And the way he would take power is by showing that he had the ability to bring people together again. And he believed that Germany needed to come back to the way it was prior to World War One. And one of his edicts was to take over Europe. 1939, there was a non-aggression pact made between Stalin and Hitler, where they had spheres of influence, where Hitler would take over the western part of Europe and Stalin would take over the eastern part, and they would divide the countries. That was supposed to be a secret pact that both of them made.
Yeah. A lot of Russians still deny that pact. What is it?
The non-aggression pact. Molotov and
Ribbentrop. Yeah. That's like it's definitely outrageous. A lot of nationalistic, patriotic Russians right now, but it's something that you can't deny. See, Russians still hesitate as of to when exactly Second World War started. So the ultimate question is, you ask them to tell them the year when the war started, and then they just crumble, they fumble under this question easy.
And I think that's what Putin's goal was all along. And I think that what his goal was to reunite the Soviet Union the way it was.
Yeah. That's what he initiated he started directly in 2014 by annexing the Crimean Peninsula.
Right. That was his goal even back then, to reunite the Soviet Republic.
When you might have heard that when Russians first crossed the borders, when they first illegally came to Ukrainian territories, they said that they firmly and utterly believed that Ukrainians were waiting for them, and they thought that Ukrainians would welcome them. Do you believe Putin really thought that Ukrainian people were waiting for the liberators to free us from the Nazi regime, as they put Ukrainian government is? Do you believe they truly expected Ukrainians, or do you think it's just an excuse, a pretext, a narrative that Putin uses?
Totally propaganda.
Yeah.
Totally propaganda. That was not true. Yeah. There are, even to this day, there are Russians in the Ukraine, and you can tell me if this is true. There are certain Russians in the Ukraine that are on the side of the Russian people or Putin.
Well, certain territories remain occupied.
Right.
Right. Certain territories remain occupied. Recently, the big thing is certain Russian groups that are now occupying Russian territories, and that seems to be a pain in Putin's, a sore in Putin's eye, because cards have turned. And it's interesting because for many years, we kept hearing that should one missile land on Russian territory, should one illegal soldier of another country cross Russian border, they will immediately launch this nukes, and then the border territories that are bordering to Ukraine and Russia on the Russian side is completely occupied. They don't even belong to Russia anymore. They have been totally occupied. And so I think this goes to prove that what I've just said goes to prove that Russian image has been greatly destroyed. The image that they may have created of a powerful country, second army in the world, as they put themselves, has been shattered, and they are far from what they claim to be.
But I also think the Russian people are also against Putin.
You think mainly they are against?
I think a lot of the younger ones, the ones who got drafted into the army, they didn't want to fight. They almost look like the Ukrainians as being cousins of theirs. I mean, there's a lot of past history that are very connected.
Certainly,
some
for sure. Yeah, we are quite intertwined, whether we like it or not. I mean, you
right,
know, it's
right.
geographically happens like that.
Yeah. So they didn't want to fight.
In case with Hitler, he wasn't alone, right?
No.
What do you make out of this almost phenomena that he wasn't alone? It was generals and soldiers and simple people who executed and performed his tasks. So what is it about him? I'm sure you've thought greatly about that. What is it about his persona, about his image that was able to captivate people's minds? So
Well, he was a very inspirational speaker, first of all. And he really played on the sympathies of the German people for losing World War I, and he wanted to reinstill the nationalism of the German country. And he was also very anti-Semitic, and he wanted to get rid of a lot of what he called undesirables. And you know, it was a lot of this was racial. He looked at the Jewish people as beneath everybody else. They were just like they were
like a lower class
on society. Right? They wanted to get rid of them. They were not necessary to have a pure Aryan race. And that resonated with a lot of people.
Why do you think that resonated with a lot of people? Do you think the loss in the World War I played a part, a great part? What is it? Have you generally thought about human psychology that tends to divide people? Because there is a part in our psychology that tends to divide mine versus yours, ours versus theirs, right? So I'm just trying to simplistically understand why people followed him. Yeah.
There was a lot of fear.
Yeah.
A lot of fear, yeah. A lot of fear, a lot of uncertainty. They didn't really understand. There's a lot of anti-Jewish sentiment because a lot of them that goes back centuries that they believe that the Jews were responsible for the killing of Christ. So it goes into a lot of religious connections that they believe they didn't belong into their society. They spoke a different language. They kind of kept to themselves. They didn't assimilate with a lot of the people in those countries. And so they kind of took distance from them. And they were leery of what their motive was. I'm talking about the populace versus the Jewish population. And if you don't know someone, you fear them. And if you fear them, you want to fight them or get rid of them. So that's what happened.
Hitler was deeply religious, wasn't he?
He was not religious.
Not religious, yeah. You no. See, I'm weak on that side. He wasn't religious, but no, didn't he appeal to some religious during one of his speeches, right?
Yeah, they was very they practiced a lot of ceremonies that were anti-religion. They didn't believe in any religion. In fact, they had the rituals that were considered almost like Satanist.
Yeah, what kind of rituals? Because there's certain stigma to those.
They were, they were practicing different types of rituals that were very bizarre, that were not considered at all spiritual or religious. It was
purely on symbolic basis, right?
Correct. They believe that sometimes what's motivating them is not coming from a godly place, but coming from a bad place. And a lot of people somehow resonated with that.
Yeah, that sounds highly satanistic, to be fair, right?
Yeah.
Right. Now, speaking about Jewish people, you might have heard what that guy Kanye West has been infamous recently for. That must clearly resonate to what Hitler said, right? Especially for people who are into that thing like you are, right? What do you make out of his horrendous phrases?
It's horrible and embarrassment, and we shouldn't even come close to listening to what he had to say. He took it right out of Hitler's playbook.
Exactly. Identical. That's just.
And they're saying that a lot of his mind isn't even right. He's not really well psychologically. A lot of people were mentioning that here in this country.
I'm pretty distant from American politics, although I do regularly listen to certain American podcasts, so I kind of hover around that informational sphere. You must notice certain similarities between, and again, regardless of your political beliefs, don't you, to put it mildly as I can, you must notice certain narrative similarities between Trump's phrases and, I don't know, Hitler's and Kanye's phrases. Is there a lot of similarities in that?
Well, you're dealing with a very narcissistic, egotistical person, and there's the one thing I know, Bohdan, there's a lot of people out there that are followers. They really follow someone who they believe is going to lead them to the promised land. And let's face it, Trump has a way of speaking that resonates with a lot of people. He's not a politician in the sense that he's a businessman, and he talks to the people in a way that they understand what he's saying. Even though
he's relatable, people can relate to him, right. And he appears to be that kind of leader that people long for, exactly because of his radicalism in lots of regards. Yeah, right. But it's interesting because I feel like when the shove comes, when the time becomes tough, it is unclear if you need a leader who is excluding, who is dissecting people. I think what you mostly need is a uniting force,
right?
And I don't think those leaders,
it's dividing the people. This is how Hitler did it, and this is how a lot of politicians do it. And right now, the polarization here in the United States is at an all-time high. There's just, it's the right versus the left, the rich versus the poor. There's a lot of division here, Bohdan, and it's very uncomfortable, and it's very serious. It's almost like they've got two countries that are coming.
How do you see this polarization, this diversion ending up? Where do you possibly see the outcome?
No, I think in the end we are going to unite.
Yeah.
There's going to be a communal environment here where people are going to come together, but we're going to have to go through some pretty tough times to get there.
And mostly what usually unites people, and I can attest to it, is a common threat and life and risk for your life. That unites like nothing else does.
Yeah.
It was ridiculously touching and painful too, but also inspiring and powerful at the same time, seeing how Ukrainian society that had also been kind of divided. I think a lot of countries politically divided in a lot of regards, but as soon as people started dying, all of a sudden everybody united and they forgot all the grudges, every offense previously taken. That was one of the most powerful, humanity
that
sign.
That happen here too.
Yeah. You think it will happen?
It could happen here, and that's how it's going to unite the people. Yeah.
What do you think that threat possibly can be in the future?
As far as how that's going to happen?
Yeah. What do you think could be the element that might bring people at peace and unite them in America?
It will be something similar to that, where they're going to see a lot of people suffering and dying, and they're going to realize we're all in this together. And that's what's going to unite the people. Yeah.
I feel like every now and then there must happen an event of some kind of huge and tragic level, right? Because if it's not huge and tragic, it doesn't have the necessary required power.
Yeah, exactly. It has to be that, for it to be getting that good, that sometimes have to be that bad.
But do you think, now it's on psychological part a little bit, do you believe that sometimes maybe we will reach a point, or maybe we could reach it right now, when we don't need a tragic and traumatic event for us to unite? Do you think we are that developed right now, or do you think humanity in general not on that level yet?
Not there. We're still going to have to go through some dark times before we reach the other side. I mean, that's what happened to my parents too. I mean, they went through horrible experiences through the war, and it was only through their faith and their love that they were brought together. And I think that's going to have to come on a larger scale for a lot of people, to see their own people dying. Because we're all children of God. We're all connected, and especially when it comes to our countries, we're all Americans, and we all love the country. We just have a different perspective on what they believe the country should be like.
And some people are ready to take it to a really radical extent, their belief, right?
Correct.
Those outliers, normally outliers is a positive term, but sometimes it might be pretty negative, as we can see with Hitler and Putin and others.
Well, the majorities have to come. The majority has to come together. Yeah. You're going to get these pockets of resistance, and as long as they try to separate people, they're going to have power. And we got to understand that those are not the people we want to be running the country.
Yeah. Now, I don't know if that's politically correct or reasonable to ask you something like that. And if you don't wish to respond, that's fine. We can skip that. What are your thoughts on the upcoming election in America? What are your thoughts on the stakes of those candidates? How do you see that unfurling in the future?
This is probably the most critical election in my lifetime. And I'm sure what goes back to World War II. It's going to be a very difficult time. And there's going to be a lot of distrust and anger coming from both sides. Where it ends up, it's too early to tell, Bohan. There's other candidates that are now going to be getting involved in the election. What happens to Trump and the trial that's going to be coming up?
When is it, by the way? Has this trial taken place?
It's going to be a while yet. It won't. It'll be probably not before the election.
Really?
Yeah, that's what they're saying. And plus the fact that on the Democratic side, you got Biden, and people don't even know if he's even going to be able to make it because of his age and because of his condition. So,
who's that candidate that people claim to have good chances? He's a mayor of a city. I can't recall him if I'm not mistaken.
Suarez in Miami is one of them.
Yeah.
Then you got Robert Kennedy Jr.
Yeah, that's the one I've been listening on podcast. He's a frequent guest lately on podcast.
Right. Yeah. Of course, he goes back to his brother and his uncle. So, I mean, his name recognition is there. So you got, and then of course you got Kamala Harris, which the vice president, who would be going into Biden's shoes if he decides to step down.
Is she strong in her chances? I've heard some influencers saying that she's got some chances.
Personally, I don't think she presents herself the way they would want to see a president. Although they're trying to make her image a little bit more polished.
Yeah. Huh.
So, but I don't think she has the ability to carry a country the way some other people can.
Do you possibly think a person from outside the political sphere could do well? Because our current president was not a politician by no means. And do you think perhaps possibly American society could benefit if somebody with kind of clear consciousness comes in, who's not been, stained with any political affairs, corruption of any sort? Do you think that could be a positive element?
Yes, but they have to be articulate, and they have to come across as they really care for the people. I don't know if there's anybody on the scene right now who's that dynamic in front of a large audience that has to resonate with people. And a lot of it, like Reagan was a wonderful president, and he was also an actor. So a lot of this is the presentation. I don't see anyone. And I have to say that Trump has a way of coming across on stage, and people really can relate to that.
He's a showman, considering his background. Right.
And no one, both on the Democratic or Republican side, have that kind of charisma the way, I hate to say it, the way that Trump does.
Those allegations that he's facing are serious, though, right? What's that all about? He was involved in some sort of quandary scandal with somebody?
Well, he ended up taking documents that believed that were part of the government's, and he took it on himself. He believes as president, he would have the right to have those documents. But the government believed that, no, those were secret documents, that he should have left them with the government, and he took them with him when he left. So there's a lot of going back and forth, and I think the trial is going to be pretty lengthy.
Yeah.
But again, he's still able to go in front of people and still campaign, but it's gonna be a distraction.
Do you think that upcoming trial, will play against him overall in the context of election, or do you think those hardcore fans will not be affected, even no matter what he commits?
No, I agree with your latter. I think that once you're a Trumper,
that's like a tattoo, right? It can't be removed.
Yeah, they're with him through thick and thin. No one's going to stop them from being with Trump. Yeah. But again, there's still a long way to go. But right now, Trump is ahead in both Democratic as well as 1-to-1 with Biden. So he's ahead. And as I said, his communication skills really give an edge to him versus the other people that's up on stage right now. Now, when the primaries go and they have these presentations, then we'll see how they go when there's debates, when the debates go on.
Right, right.
But, Biden is going to try to steer clear of that. He doesn't want to debate anybody. He just wants to stay away from the debates because, his mind is not as sharp as it was.
Yeah, understandably, for sure. I also feel certain almost happiness for the fact that no matter, I'm aware of the fact that it's going to sound dubious, but knowing the fact that societies tend to be separated mostly, it's almost sometimes almost a privilege, because once again, I feel like it's positively speaking to the democracy, because I don't know if I'd like to live in a country that would be predominantly one way. You know what I mean? Maybe that would be positive, but there has to be counterbalance. And I always feel like it's like a pendulum swing. Even in the moment when it gets the most left, then it flies the most right, and vice versa. So I think that's kind of like, the left are always fighting with the right, and those guys who are more liberal versus those who are a little bit more,
right,
classically thinking, let's put it that way. They're always at stakes, they're always fighting, but that's part of the game, I feel like. So sometimes I'm happy that here in Ukraine, it's been like that. Now it's the current running party understandably gets the most support, right? But even in this trying and tough times, we still have loud opposition, which is insane because currently it's not a peaceful time. It's nice to have opposition when people aren't dying. But on the other side, it's always important to have the opposition. So I feel like we're where we're supposed to be.
I think the American people are really surprised how well the Ukrainians are going up against the Russians. But in the beginning, we all thought that it would be a matter of weeks before Putin.
Well, that's what happened. Because that's what happened. Yeah, in 2014.
To see how well those soldiers are fighting for the Ukrainians, they're very impressed with the way they're going about pushing Putin back.
Yeah, do you feel though endlessly sad for the fact that best of our people are dying, and I don't know what kind of repercussion it will have in the future for the fact that we are currently losing the bravest, the best.
Heartbreaking.
Yeah.
But that's what war is.
Yeah.
And so, and for no reason. I mean, Putin did not have to do this, but I think, to him, it's just like with Hitler, Bunny. They're just looking at a way of the national. When you want to nationalize, and nationalism is in your heart, then you want to unite the country. And so to him, he thinks he's doing nothing wrong. He's just going back to the way the Soviet Union was back then, before World War II. He believed he's trying to bring the country as it was back then. So he thinks he's in the right. And of course, he's actually trampling on an independent country. He does. And so that's where the big problem is, because the Ukrainians are an independent country.
Yeah. And that independency was confirmed by Russia included. So it's like they've trespassed, they've broken all possible international laws and decrees and whatever. I don't think anybody has done more harm to Russia than Putin himself, to be honest, and those who perform his orders. They keep blaming NATO and other countries, nobody more than them.
I'm not sure whether he expected this to be the way it is right now. I think this came as quite a shock that his soldiers they're not winning the war. So I think he didn't realize how strong the Ukrainian people are about fighting back.
Yeah, I firmly believe, I think he firmly believed that we would welcome them. We would welcome them. And the hell we didn't, No.
Well, because he thinks there's a common history between the two countries.
Yeah, big one, for sure.
Right. And that's what he was banking on.
Isn't it funny for you to hear sometimes, perhaps you get to hear opinion like that time to time around you, that Putin was forced into it, he was dashed into this condition? Isn't it funny to hear? Because imagine yourself being a president. You can cancel all of it within a second, in a matter of a day. You may not initiate it in the first place. So to say that Putin was somehow forced by NATO expansion to do this thing, it's absolutely horrendous in my opinion, right?
Why you believe that it wasn't that he didn't independently want to do this? He was pushed into this war?
Yeah, we keep hearing sometimes I listened to some podcasts, and for some reason, and it's part of my awakening, my informational awakening. People I used to look up to, having their current beliefs, have completely gone, disappeared in my eyes. I've lost my idols, religiously speaking. But those voices that reach me sometimes, they sometimes drop something like, yeah, well, wasn't he forced? Wasn't he pushed into doing something like that? Didn't NATO want to expand? Wasn't Ukraine planning on joining NATO? The hell, of course we were, because part of our territory was already occupied. So joining NATO was last kind of beam of hope.
Right.
Yeah, but then if I was Putin, so many deaths could have been avoided. So many tragedies could have been precluded. That's unbelievable. So that comment, that is just funny for me to hear that Putin was forced into it. But anyway, we tend to digress a little bit. So when you made the decision to write that book, first of all, how long did it take you to from the first page to the last?
Took about 1.5 years.
Yeah. How did you structure yourself about writing? What was the process like?
Well, the basis of the book comes out of those documents that I earlier spoke about. So I already had a nucleus of the book. The rest is information I got from, as I said, my cousin. And I'm telling you, honey, it was like it just flowed. I would do drafts, and then I would refine it. And the thing I didn't know is the fact I really didn't know the dialogue between my mother and my father. And that's why it's called a historical fiction. It's based on a true story, but obviously I wasn't there in the 1930s and 40s to know what they were talking about.
But you elaborated the dialogue in the book.
Exactly, right? Exactly. And I knew about the situations in many instances. My mother would tell me certain things, and I kind of embellished that around some of the chapters. I knew about my sister being taken. My mother and my sister were underneath the floorboard in their apartment. They were hiding underneath the floor in what they call a spider hole. My father built a little room down under the floor, and the German SS came in and found them under the floor. And that's how my sister was literally taken out of my mother's arms. The German took the child because they had a command to take all the children under the age of 16. They wanted to get rid of all the Jews. They didn't want any future generations. They wanted the Jews to continue to work and they believed that the children were a hindrance to the working process of the people. Wow. And if they got rid of the children, women would be more productive. That's how crazy it was. And that's how they justified taking the children.
Pardon me asking, was your sister killed before your mother's eyes?
No. They were put on a truck and then shipped to the extermination chamber about 5-6 miles away. It was a fort. It was a Russian fort they converted to a prison. And they took 1,600 children. It was called the children of the Kindernacht, the night of the children's action. And they took the children. Before that, they just go in and take jewelry and clothes and appliances, and then they would leave. This time they took the children. So they put them on the truck, and then they would drive them over to the extermination area, and they would shoot them.
They shoot them. Yeah. According to Viktor Frankl, you may have read him, Man's Search of Meaning. You read that book, right? Yeah. Yes. He describes in great details how people were taken to huge... the people would be burned there, So the Germans would take people and they would burn them in this... And the smoke that was coming out of those things was black, and it smelled like fried meat. And
that was the crematorium. That's where they would take them into the showers when they first arrived by train, and then they would gas them in the showers by putting a poison pellets into the shower stall, and that's where they would die. And then they would take them and just take them to the crematorium to be burned.
So it wasn't, I observed, not only... how would I put it, like blind effectiveness, it was done with particular, it was vicious. It wasn't just to, get rid the territories of the people. He didn't have to burn them and gas them, right? But he ordered them. So that was a specific element of hatred, right?
Towards that. A systematic way of exterminating people. Yeah. you know, they came up with a system before they were throwing them into the ditches, as you mentioned, and shoot them and bury them over, you know, over the pit. Now they came up with the idea of starting these gas mobile units where they would end up taking them into the showers once they arrived into the camps. They would kill 200-300 at a time, and then they would burn them in the crematorium. Now, when my father's job, when I read the documents, one of my father's job in Dachau was to remove the bodies off the electrical fences. My father was an electrician. And one of the reasons they kept him alive was to do the electrical work inside of Dachau. And one of his jobs was every day he was responsible for taking the bodies off the electrical fences, either those who wanted to commit suicide or those who wanted to escape. And then he would take the bodies and put them onto a wheelbarrow, and then he would wheel them into the crematorium, and then they would burn the bodies. That was one of his major jobs in the Dachau concentration camp. And so they had a systematic way of killing. That's what they did.
Yeah. Certainly, a lot of modern German families have roots from the Nazis' roots. How do you imagine modern Germans coming at peace with what happened? That's one thing I've been thinking a lot about. I haven't asked anybody like that. How does a family come at peace with the fact that their grandparents, great-grandfather did these things, because those things weren't done single-handedly by Hitler, right? Millions of people were involved. Have you thought about that?
Yeah, I think they believe that, as they said during the Nuremberg trials, they were just following orders. You know, and you got to also remember, a lot of these soldiers were given drugs. I don't know if you know that they were given drugs in their rations, and a lot of them were drugged, and they did things that normal people wouldn't do because they were
bewitched in a way, right? I do imagine there must have been. I wonder if we have some statistic of people who disobeyed, you know, of those who broke through.
Yeah, they got shot for treason, or they were hung.
Yeah.
But I don't know. The families, I think they just said, well, he was a Nazi, but he was fighting on the side of the Germans. He was fighting for his country, that he believed he was doing the right thing. Although how could it be right for killing so many innocent people? But I don't even know if some of these families even want to go back and think about that.
Yeah, I don't think they contemplate it on a regular basis. I don't even know if they should, honestly, because that's not a stain that can easily be removed, honestly. Now, would you agree? I've happened to hear this interesting phrase by one person who said that we shouldn't easily assume which side we would have picked had we happened to be there. What do you make out of this phrase? Because for a long time, this phrase made a lot of sense to me, right? But then, considering the current sort of status quo of my country and of the event, I also want to believe that sometimes it's simple black and white, right versus wrong, right? Yeah.
Oh, so you're saying because they say we weren't there, so we shouldn't have to think about them?
So simplistically, he basically says something like, we shouldn't easily assume that we would have been on the right side, because seeing the right side is available to us only through the retrospective of time. Yeah, that's a bit of a straw man argument, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think they were just grasping for straws. They're coming up with some idea which is, I don't see where it holds any water now.
Yeah, I think so. Again, it's wild to imagine how many things you theoretically believe up until the moment when shit hits the fan, pardon my language, right? And when shit hits the fan, things become clear. Right. And I also, so do you think for those generals and soldiers from the Nazis, do you think things were clear for them back in the day, more or less? Do you think they truly believed what they were doing, that they were cleaning their nation, removing the garbage, or you think they firmly believe that?
Yeah, I do. I think that Hitler brainwashed these people to believe that, you know, they were the master race, and they had the honor to be the ones to rule the world. And as I said, they got rid of as many undesirables. And plus they were looking at the Jews as being enemies of the state. Because I don't know if you know, but in 1940, when Russia took over Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia, a lot of the Lithuanians and the other countries believed that the Jews were collaborating with the Russians. And then when the Nazis came in and pushed the Germans back into when they pushed the Russians back into the Soviet Union, that the locals wanted to take out their anger on the Jews for collaborating with the Russians. When it was never corroborated that actually happened.
Wow.
So there was a lot of politics going on back then, and the Jews were in the middle. They were sent to Siberia by the Russians, and then the Nazis came in and killed them from the other side.
I was going to ask you, what do you think that is about the Jewish people that makes them almost this scapegoat? What is this?
It's been going on since the days of Abraham.
Yeah.
There was a lot that they just didn't believe that they were people who would be following the mainstream. They were looked upon as being among themselves as being not as patriotic as they would want them to be.
Some kind of rebels.
They didn't know the religion.
Yeah.
They didn't really understand the religion, and they had those kinds of pogroms that were happening in Russia for decades, if not hundreds of years. That was going on way before Hitler got into power.
So it all dates back to the religion days, right?
I think that's one of the basic tenets of why the Jews were always picked, was because they didn't follow the mainstream. Was back in the old days when they were worshiping idols, the Jews were a monolithic religion. And then as the Christians came, they believed that they looked at the Jews as being one of the responsible parties of killing Christ. That also created a lot of anti-Semitism. That goes on even to this day. There's still a lot of Christians that believe the Jews are responsible. So yeah, when you're talking about religious reasons, it can be a very sensitive area, and it makes people angry. So
aside from religious reasons, are those things that people blame Jewish people for, like occupying top positions? And I don't know, I mean, I've happened to hear something about scheming people. Where do you think, aside from religious, that might be coming from? Is it just, again, this people's tendency to exclude and diverge, dissect people, polarization? Is that something like ours versus theirs? Is that what it is?
Well, I think a lot of it is envy, jealousy, insecurity of the people. That is true. A lot of the Jewish people had positions of power, within whether it's in the business world, whether it's in the media, and they were very suspicious of the Jews because they felt they were such a small minority, and they just got this feeling that they were here to actually control all society. And so it was a very difficult thing for them to just believe that they were just people who were following their faith, and had nothing to do with them, in the sense that, it's not us against them. We're all, as I said, we're all children of God.
Yeah. The Holocaust, from this perspective, gets a new magnitude. If you think about all this, that's a real, people been throwing this term generational trauma left and right, but now talk about generational trauma to a Jewish person, right? That's a real generational trauma right there. So were you typing your book, or were you using some notes, handwritten notes, some drafts on papers? Was it just digital, mainly digital?
No, I wrote a lot of it myself, and then I transferred it over onto digital.
Right. And
right
now,
I had a number of drafts that I put together, and then I had it edited a number of times. Then I edited a number of photographs where I got from the Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, the World Remembrance Center, and I got many of my photos from the Holocaust Museum, which they gave me permission to use their photos. You'll see a lot in the book that are photos that you normally won't see. And there's not a lot of graphics. It's only one photograph of a graphic image, but all the rest are just photographs that were really very poignant.
Right.
I didn't want to go into a lot of the horrors that photographs. I didn't want to do that.
Well, yeah, that doesn't take too long to discover something like that. It's pretty, it's open right there. What is the logic behind not making it a hard copy, a hardcover? You said it's available only as an ebook, right? Was
No,
it?
it is. It's a soft cover
Okay.
book,
Yeah.
and it's been that right from the start. Behind what happened in about two weeks ago, we created an
Oh,
ebook,
okay.
which and up till then it was you had to order the book. I had to send
Right.
the physical book to you,
Right.
and
Right.
if I'm going to be going into Europe and into other parts of the world, that's going to be very expensive because of the shipping, and
Right.
so a lot of people won't be able to afford the book.
Yeah.
But
From
now,
that point, it's excellent. Yeah. Now I
yeah.
see the point for sure.
So
Now
the
I see the
ebook
point.
is very simple. You just order it and it goes right to your right to your website, right to your email.
Right, right. And I've always been curious. I've had one author on my podcast previously, so I've asked him about the process of publishing itself. Was it self-published, or did you refer to a publishing house? How did that process
No,
happen?
I self-published. I
Yeah.
ended up going to a company that actually printed the book for me.
Mhm.
I didn't go through like Amazon or Barnes and Noble. I just wanted to have more control over the book,
Mhm.
and the expense of going through a publishing house can be pretty steep.
Uh-huh.
So I control everything.
Nice.
Right now, up till now, I was actually taking the book and putting in envelopes and going to the post office every day and mailing out each one. I autograph every book.
Wow,
Every book
that's
I go,
nice
I
of you.
autograph the
Yeah,
book.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's really nice of you for sure. So you said that the publisher, whoever the company you referred to, they didn't have a hand in the structure of the book, of editing of the book, right? They
No,
didn't. Yeah,
no.
that's nice.
I gave them the book, and then they would actually print the
Right.
book. I had a graphic designer who designed the book,
Wow.
and then I got the books, and then I started using social media
Hmm.
and speaking in front of people, and this is how the book started. And here in the States, the book is doing extremely well.
Mm-hmm.
And for the couple of weeks it's been out, people in Europe are ordering the ebook, so that's been very positive too.
Right. Yeah. So when how is, if that's not a private information, how much did that process of self-publishing it cost you? Because I'm always curious about that. I'm always wondering, because every now and then I'm a big reader, a bookworm, and I always thought, well, maybe if one day I decide to scrap something, how much that would cost me? What was that?
It's not well. It depends on the book. I mean,
Yeah.
my book is about 175 pages, and it's not cheap.
Yeah.
But it's a lot better than going through going through a Barnes and Noble or a bookseller, because they take a big percentage of the printing and then they market the book. And that's the hard thing, Barnes, is the fact that promoting the book is very, very important. And that's a lot of work. That's almost as much work as writing the book, because you're not going to, because the publisher will take care of that. In my case, I had to do all the promotion myself. And that takes a lot of time and a lot of work. But I would say, yeah, it's pretty expensive. You spend, I would say, $8,000 to $10,000 at least for the first three. Well, for me, it all depends on, as I said, the quality of the book, the paper, the actual printing company that's doing the book. But you got to have some backing to get that out. Of course, if it's a smaller book, my book is pretty big. It's 9.5 by 11. It's a good sized book. And so it's going to be more expensive. And so then I charge accordingly. But the money's never been a problem for people to buy the book.
And I
Rarely.
think it shouldn't be an objective for you as for an author to write something
Absolutely
like that,
not.
right?
No. My job is to make sure that this book gets into the hands of as many people as possible.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I'm doing, and that's why I'm so excited, because I think ebook is going to be going all over. And that was the whole mission of mine, was to get this book into the hands so people understood who my parents were and what happened to them, and that their lives on this planet wasn't in vain. They left a message of the love and the courage and the faith that got them through the war. That's the message I leave them. And if they were able to do that, then we can do the same thing. We have the same innate qualities in us as human beings, that they have the ability to do that, to get over to such a horrible experience. You also can do the same thing regardless of what the circumstances is.
Exactly, absolutely. And I feel unbelievably privileged with having a conversation with people like you. And that's one of those few benefits of having a technology at our hands that called the internet, that we can almost in person, let's put it that way, meet and exchange and inspire other people. No matter how small the audience is, it's still unbelievable honor and privilege. And it's a noble pursuit that you're on. yeah, how lucky do you feel for having the idea of distributing, of spreading the word? Imagine if that idea had never crossed your mind. That would have
No,
been a
I know. I
disaster,
mean,
right?
it gave me tremendous purpose. And to this day, when I wake up in the morning, I know I have purpose. I have a goal, and I work long hours every day. Even at this point, I'm still out there promoting the book. There's never enough people. But no, I feel very privileged to be and I get a lot of on Facebook. There's a lot of comments. They're thanking me for writing the book. They give me stories about their grandparents and their relatives who were in the war, and they tell me about their experiences.
That's
And
exactly
so,
what happened with me. Yeah, my mother, remember that story that I shared. Yeah, wow. Yeah, I can
so
only imagine the feedback and what it invokes in you, hearing those gratitude words. That must be an unbelievable experience, isn't it? Right.
yeah. Well,
Understanding that the book has done well. That the book has done. Do you have like a full-time job though, or a part-time job besides from touring and promoting the book?
no, well, I was working full time in consulting and human resources, but I'm now semi-retired, so I'm spending most of my time on the book. And also keep in mind, I don't have family. I never got married. I don't have any children. So this book to me is like the child I
Yeah,
never
yeah,
had.
yeah, yeah, definitely.
Because this is the legacy that I'm going to leave. When I'm gone, that's going to be in the libraries. So that's what's going to be what I'm going to contribute to society is going to be my parents' book, keeping their legacy alive and keeping my legacy alive.
Right, right. There are plenty of forms of being of never dying. Honestly, I feel like, right, you can leave your name in the history. I don't think forever, because sooner or later it's always a question of time, no matter how long the span is. Yeah, but you can be immortal in many forms, I feel like.
Right, right.
Sure.
Since so it gives me satisfaction to know I'm leaving something behind when I go.
What was the most challenging thing about writing that book?
The children, writing about the death of so many children. I have one chapter called "The Death of Innocence," and there was a little picture in there of a 3.5-year-old. Her name is Lena. She's from Lithuania. She died in the same place at the same time, and she was the same age as my sister. I got that off of the Yad Vashem website, and so I imagine that she was with my sister at the time my sister was taken. She represents the 1,600 who died on March 27th, 28th, in 1944 in that picture. And when you look at this picture and you see the innocence on her face, it just crushes you to think that anybody could take a life of a child. That's the hardest thing to this day. I cried through that chapter. I cried a lot.
For
It was a
sure.
very, very hard chapter for me to write. Even to this day, when I look at her face,
Yeah.
it's very hard for me to really comprehend what happened.
Yeah, for sure, definitely. That can't be justified, excused. Only conclusion should be made. Only lesson should be made. What is, you've mentioned something like that, but to summarize what we've said, what is the main narrative from the book? What is one lesson that you would like people to hear from that book, if you had to summarize it?
Well, that's the whole crux of the book. It's the spiritual aspect of the book. The fact is that it is the strength of the human spirit that kept my parents alive. And it was the fact that they had the love for each other, the perseverance, the faith, and the courage to transcend the darkness to find the other side, to come to this country, have productive lives here in the United States, raise 2 children, and to be able to do that over such trauma, over those 4 or 5 years they were in captivity, is a miracle. And so I leave my audience with the understanding that if my parents had the ability to overcome such a tragedy, that we also have the same innate qualities in us that can face any challenge, and we can come out in the light.
Yeah, that's beautiful. When I was reading Viktor Frankl's book, I think he was also sent to a concentration camp with his wife. And when I was reading that, I felt like, man, maybe for me, it felt like it would almost have been better if I had been there alone. Because, it's one thing then you worried for yourself, but when there's a loved one, and you don't know, and for God knows how long you've not been around. You don't even know if the person is dead or alive. So then considering your parents and the fact that they were together during all through that
Yeah,
trying period.
but they weren't. They weren't together all through that. 3 months after my sister died,
Yeah,
they were put on separate trains, and my father was going to Dachau, and my mother was going to Stutthof, which is in northern Poland.
Yeah.
And they made a vow. That's why it's called the vow, a love story in the Holocaust. They made a vow on the train platform, Bohan, where they made a vow that if either one were to live, they were to go back to the place where they first met in the Countess, Lithuania. So for nearly 9 months, they didn't even know if the other one was still alive. Father in Dachau, mother in Stutthof. My father got liberated by the Americans. My mother got liberated by the Russians. And my father spent 3 months on the road looking for my mother, going from displacement camp to displacement camp, looking for my mom.
Wow.
That's where the refugees went after the war. And he traveled through 3 countries looking for my mother, and he finally found her in Poland. Wow. I'm not going to go into how that happened. So you can imagine, this is 3 months after Rose was killed. They're now on separate boxcars going in opposite directions, not even knowing where they were going. All they said, they were being resettled for their own safety. That's what the Germans were telling them. But they were going into the concentration camps. And so here it is, 8.5 months. They didn't even know if they were still alive.
That's what I meant. That was probably the worst, because if you're single, but then you know that she's somewhere there, right? You know that she's somewhere there.
Either dead or alive.
Yes. Wow. That's...
So you can imagine that trauma is unbelievable. Here for days, for months, they didn't even know if they'd ever see each other again.
But I think like that vow, yeah, it made them stronger, I feel like. They probably were holding to it, right?
Absolutely.
Leaning on it.
Right. My father's drive to go through the 3 months of looking for it was based on the fact that he made a vow to her and he was going to keep it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the strongest tour de force of human spirit, I feel like. That's the triumph of love, really, of love.
Right. Of love. Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, love, I know it sounds trivial and primitive and perhaps banal, because, love is one of those terms that gets thrown around all the time. But at the end of the day, it takes certain pain and experience and trauma to understand that at the end of the day, that's the only thing that matters. The only thing that matters. Nothing else does.
That's why we're here.
Yes.
We're here for that.
And that's the reason and the purpose. That's the outcome and the reason, right?
And that's how we're going to come together in the end, Bohan. Yeah. In the end, through love, that's how we're going to communicate, and we're going to come together as a community all around the world through love for each other and love for ourselves.
I can only imagine how it was for them to finally reunite at last. There must have been, I don't know, a crazy experience when he finally found them.
I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but I will tell you that one thing my mother did tell me was my mother had typhus fever at the time. She was in a makeshift hospital in Białystok, Poland. And when my father found her, my mother told me when she was still alive that she looked up at my father thinking he was an angel. And she said to him, "David, are we in heaven?" This is exactly what my mother told me. She said, "David," because she thought my father came back to take her to heaven. She didn't even think she was even alive at that point.
Because of the condition, right?
Yeah, she was hallucinating because she had a high fever and she was only hours away from death. And my father found her on a cot in the middle of this room with my aunt next to her. But it's an incredible chapter how they finally met again. And she almost died. I mean, it was only through my father's love that she was able to live. It's incredible. It was an incredible story.
Wow.
And all this I'm telling you is like, it almost sounds like a fictional movie, but all this I'm telling you are the documents that are in the book.
Oh, no, there are a lot of stories for sure.
Yeah.
There are, reality is way crazier than fiction. I feel like fiction imitates reality in this
Absolutely.
That way.
And I think even in the Ukraine right now, there are stories like
yeah, heartbreaking, but uniting at the same time.
Exactly.
You
Right
keep
now. Right
hearing
now.
something, but the thing is that I'm endlessly devastated for the fact that we could probably do without that. We could probably do without it, but then on the other hand, could we? I mean, right? Is there beauty without sorrow? Is there satisfaction without pain and suffering?
Right.
So,
Well, without darkness and the light, there's always a contrast between both things.
yeah,
That's one of the reasons that the book goes into all that,
yeah,
that we have two different energies and you have to be strong. But and yeah, that's what I leave my audience with, is that you can walk out of that auditorium knowing that you have the same kind of
hmm,
strength of the human. It's your eternal spirit, and you got to know that it's there. You just have to tap into it.
hmm, hmm, hmm. What's next for you? Have you thought what would be next for you? Is touring pretty much concludes, your
Well, yeah,
journey with that book?
I'm going to continue to tour, and my second book, I'm not really sure about. It may have to do with the children that survived the camps. I don't know if I'm going to talk about my own personal life or what it
Yeah.
was like to be raised by Holocaust
Oh, yeah,
parents.
yeah, yeah.
Well, I could tell you stories about my mother smothering, walking me to school at 5, 6 years old in hand, not letting me go. She would be
Right.
in the court in the courtyard waiting for me to come out of school at 3 o'clock and walking me home. She was very protective.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but yeah,
Yeah, yeah, that would be nice to get an insight on the psychology, the
yeah,
relationships, like inside of those traumatized, realistically couples, right?
right. They had a tendency of eating very fast.
Hmm.
And so I'm the same way. I tend to eat fast because at the dinner table they would eat fast. I never had food.
Yeah, so that's what you took from them, right?
Mm.
Well, listen, Michael, that's been a roller coaster. Honestly, I'll be sure to get the book. Definitely, 100%. I'm definitely getting there. And you're on a noble, great mission. I'm grateful to you for spreading the word. It would have been nothing but shame for not promoting, distributing, spreading it. Honestly. Yeah, so I don't know how much you've heard from the last attempt, from the last recording, but to conclude this fantastic episode, to summarize it, I'd just like to tell that I normally currently am not even that much into listening to podcasts, and sometimes I am fairly conflicted for running one, because how can
Yeah.
you do something that you ain't even that much of a fan? But it is exactly after podcasts like this one, the current one, the one with you, that I truly feel fulfillment in a way, right? Because
Thank you.
that goes back to inspiring people, to motivating people, to invoking, igniting something in people. And I believe that even though I am heartbroken for the fact that my audience isn't big enough for somebody like you, for people with that kind of story, with that kind of magnitude and level of stories, but I want to believe that at least those who will listen to it will extract what must be extracted.
But also keep in mind that I have a big audience here in the States, Bohan, and what you're telling me about the Ukraine and your feelings about Ukraine, that information you're providing me is going to reach a lot of people here in the States.
Yeah.
So this is good for you too, because you'll be able to get your feelings known here in the
Yeah.
States.
Yeah.
But I do want to give you my website. Now, you're not going to do any editing then, right? You're not going to edit this at all.
Oh, no, nothing will be excluded. Just raw as we spoke, just like that. I'm going to just include a little intro in the beginning of the video, and that's it. Yeah, we're just doing a little bit.
Because I wanted to leave you the website address, because they can't order the book unless I tell you.
I will paste it in the video description for sure.
All right.
Definitely.
So you got the website.
Yes, I will include everything that I can find. You are free to give me any additional links. I'll definitely do my best. That's what I always do. And once again, it's been nothing but honor and privilege, and I'm grateful to you for doing what you do. You're on a valorous mission, I must say. And I'm really happy for the fact that you've decided to do it. And best of luck.
So how are you going to get this link over to me? I guess you're going to get it over to me soon, or?
I'm dropping it tomorrow. I'm pretty sure after we wrap it up, I'm going to edit it, match it all together, and via email, if you don't mind, tomorrow I will send you the link to YouTube and to Spotify. Yes.
Okay. I'll be in touch with you. I'll keep you posted.
Thank you very much, sir. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Goodbye.